Shabbat Shalom. This is Shabbat Vayishlach. Vayishlach is Hebrew for "and he sent." Another connecting verse beginning this parashah. And he sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the countryside of Edom. At first glance, this parashat seems to be about Yaakov's preparation for and his reunion with his estranged brother Esau. But as we read further, we discover that the central narrative of this parashat is not Yaakov's meeting with his twin, but his second meeting with Hashem. A meeting ordained for the purpose of demonstrating to Yaakov God's blessing on his life. Most people would like their lives to be blessed by God. But in order to experience his blessing, we must commune with him. Whatever blessing or guidance you desire at this moment, meeting with God always comes first, as we see so clearly through the many experiences of our father Yaakov. However, this morning we're going to look at a subject that we don't talk about most of the time. The narrative of the abduction and rape of Dina, Yaakov's daughter, and her subsequent rescue by her brothers is one that we often ignore. The narrative begins innocently, and Dina, the daughter of Leah, who she had borne to Yaakov, went out to observe the daughters of the land. Bereshit 34:1. The entire account reads rather like a thriller, but why is it included in the Torah? In general, Sephirot Bereshit and Shemot provide an outline of God's interaction with humans, and specifically with the descendants of Shem and the family of Avraham. The account of Dina's abduction and subsequent rescue doesn't seem to particularly fit. It doesn't seem relevant to this theme. Perhaps in past readings of this parashah, you've wondered why God chose to tell us about this incident, which is an embarrassing aspect of family history. The sort of thing we just don't talk about, although the Torah contains specific commandments related to those who act in this way. Perhaps looking back on what happened to Dina. I think in order to understand why it's included in the Torah, we need to take a closer look at the incident itself. But remember, God does not need to explain himself to us. His purpose is served, even when we do not fully understand. So here it is. Dina, the daughter of Yaakov, apparently on an innocent visit to meet others of her age from among the Canaanites, possibly not the brightest action on her part, certainly not alone and unescorted, but she was seen, she was abducted, and she was raped by Shechem, the Hivite. Following the abduction, Shechem did not send her home. Instead, he sent word to Dina's family that he wanted to marry her. We read of her brothers, and they said to them, "We are unable to do this thing, to give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for it is a disgrace to us. But in this manner we can agree to you, if you will be like us, if you will circumcise every male among you, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us. We will dwell with you and be one nation." At this point, we should realize that there is something going on that we don't quite understand. Abduction and rape of a woman of another tribal group was not unusual. But Shechem apparently wanted to make Dina his wife. We know with the giving of Torah and the laws of God generations later that marriage with Canaanites was forbidden. It would be forbidden by God. But at this time, we're not a nation. We're only a large family, a tribe. So what happened next? Shechem, accompanied by his father, Hamor, visited Yaakov and his sons and formally asked to be allowed to marry Dina. Her brothers responded, not her father. Her brothers responded that they would not allow her, their sister, to marry an uncircumcised man. Of course, much more is meant here than mere physical circumcision. They're suggesting that Shechem and his people actually become part of the family of Yaakov, of Israel, followers of the one true God. Shechem was told that if he, his father, and all the males of the city will be circumcised, then the family of Yaakov will agree to the marriage. They even suggest that if this is done, they will join with the citizens of the city as one people. But what are their intentions? One people under the one and only God of Israel, or one people who includes the God of Israel as one of their gods? Shechem, Hamor, and the men of the city surprisingly agree. And the necessary multiple circumcisions are performed. This seems surprising, really, because what are they gaining? Dina? Is that it? Or do they think that as a result of this, the people of Yaakov's family, the whole of his tribe, will simply become part of them with all their wealth, because he was very wealthy, and everything would be under their city, enlarging them. We don't know what their thoughts were, but whatever we think is about to happen in this narrative, an unpleasant surprise awaits these men. 3 days after they underwent circumcision, which is interesting in itself, because wouldn't you think immediately after, while the men of the city are still recovering, it took them a while, Shimon and Levi, two of Yaakov's sons, enter the city with their servants and kill all the males. Their purpose seemingly is to rescue Dina. And to do this, they eliminate anyone who might attempt to oppose their action. The consequence of this action on their parts raises a number of serious questions, but we're going to focus on just two of them. First, what do we think of the offer Yaakov's sons made to Shechem and Hamor? Does it seem odd that having abducted and raped their sister, her assailant is now being allowed the opportunity to marry her? Remember, she has not been returned to her family. Would most brothers accept this sort of union under the circumstances? And second, whatever their motives might have been, Yaakov's sons did apparently agree to this bargain with Shechem. Or was that only a way to get Dina back? It seems that the conditions, at least outwardly, had been met. Shechem and his father and the men of the city were circumcised. So why were Yaakov's sons not satisfied with the response of Shechem, Hamor, and the men of the city? We read this in 34:13, and the sons of Yaakov answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, with wisdom, and they said, because he had defiled Dina, their sister. But let's look at this verse a little more carefully. The verse immediately precedes their response, but the Hebrew doesn't necessarily state that the sons of Yaakov answered with wisdom. In the Hebrew text, the word is very ambiguous. The word mirma can mean wisdom, but can also mean deception. As we see from the outcome, there was an element, more than an element perhaps, of deception in their response. This verse is also a bit difficult to follow. It begins by telling us that Yaakov's sons responded before outlining the actual response. They were motivated by the act of Shechem in defiling their sister. This consideration influenced and shaped their response. Their primary consideration was Shechem's violation of their sister and his apparent unwillingness to return her to her family. Because of these actions, they were completely unwilling to consider marriage between Shechem and Dina. Perhaps if she had been returned to them and questioned about what she wanted, maybe that would have been different. But at no point was she returned. So, rather than an outright rejection of Shechem's desire, after which Shechem would merely do as he pleased with Dina, the family of Yaakov decided they must appear willing to accept some sort of settlement, although at no point were they actually willing to allow Shechem to marry Dina. They did want Dina back. They cared about their sister, and they also cared about what this was saying to neighboring peoples. Was it wrong to act toward Shechem and his people in this manner? There was definitely an element of deception in their response, since this was not actually an attempt to negotiate a solution. Instead, they formulated an offer, assuming that with rejection of their offer, Dina would hopefully be returned to her family. To their surprise, the offer was accepted, and probably with some deception on the parts of Shechem and Hamor, who were thinking that they were getting not only Yaakov and his sons, but all of that they had as part of their agreement. But the offer was accepted, so there's an unexpected situation. Never under consideration was Dina's marriage to the man who had kidnapped and raped her. It seems that Shechem would go to remarkable lengths to retain Dina. But it wasn't just Dina he was thinking of getting. It was also that which her wealthy family had. An opportunity to add the tribe of Israel to their city population and wealth. And so Dina's brothers had no choice but to rescue her through force and eliminate all opposition to their efforts. So they entered the city, they killed the male inhabitants, and secured the rescue of their sister, which had been their intention from the beginning. Yaakov's response is enlightening. But did he take part in the decision-making? Yaakov said to Shimon and Levi, "You have stained me through making me despicable to the people of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my people are few in number, and they will gather against me and strike me and destroy me and my household." Yaakov is concerned. He condemns the actions of his sons on the basis of how it will look to the neighboring peoples. But they defend their behavior, arguing almost the same way, what will the neighboring peoples think of us if we allow our sister to be treated as a prostitute or a slave? Now we know that Yaakov was present when his sons proposed circumcision to Dina's captors. He certainly must have known that circumcision would be unlikely to change the moral character of these pagans. He must have suspected that his sons had a plan, yet when this plan was executed, he protested. What was the dispute between Yaakov and his sons? They did not intend to give Dina to Shechem, but also they did not expect this outcome. Faced with the consequences, Yaakov was unhappy. Did he really want Dina to marry Shechem? Of course not. He was, however, concerned that his sons had endangered all of the family. The Bnei Israel were a minority people group in the land of Canaan. Others of the land who might identify with Shechem and his people might seek to avenge the action taken by Yaakov's sons. Yaakov and his children would not be able to defend themselves with such an attack. Yaakov is also concerned that his sons had violated their agreement with Shechem. Thus, the people of Canaan would conclude that Yaakov and his family were dishonest and dishonorable. This would reflect negatively on their faith and ultimately on their God. How did his sons respond? It seems in this case that Shimon and Levi were basically the ones in charge here. And they They disputed both of Yaakov's arguments. The brothers maintained that the people of Canaan were not so immoral as to condone the outrageous behavior of Shechem. Well, who knows? They believed that the people of Canaan would recognize the right of Yaakov and his sons to rescue Dina. They would understand the necessity of using subterfuge, since Shechem, Hamor, and their city outnumbered Yaakov and his family. Anyone could see that they would be unable to rescue their sister without first disabling her captors. And so the Bnei Israel would not be condemned for acting in the way they had. Neither would they be in danger of retribution. To sum up this position, Yaakov's sons never considered allowing a marriage between their sister, and Shechem. When confronted with the surprising acquiescence of Shechem to their demands, they reacted by rescuing Dina by force. Yaakov disapproved of their method, not of the action itself, but of their method in accomplishing it. And he felt that his sons had shamed the family and endangered them. His sons disagreed, arguing that the people of the land would understand and even sympathize with their actions. Although that would be a first, wouldn't it? Usually the people of the land do not sympathize with us. Perhaps you are of the opinion that we should simply read what is written and not seek to understand why it is written. But I disagree, because this narrative informs our understanding of Yaakov and of his sons. You see, this incident precedes the Torah's account of the conflict between Yosef and his brothers, which eventually led to the exile of the Bnei Israel in Egypt. Much of Sefer Bereshit is an account of Hashem's relationship with the Bnei Israel, our family. Before we would be prepared to possess the land of Israel, the family of Yaakov needed to grow into a nation. It is difficult for a single, isolated family, subject to tremendous pressure to assimilate into surrounding nations and cultures, even look at us today, to develop into a distinct nation, as instanced by this event centered on Dina. How would Yaakov's children resist the pressure to assimilate? Assimilation could only be avoided if Yaakov's children saw themselves as separate and different from the surrounding peoples. But the story of Dina does not suggest that they viewed themselves as an alien family in the land of Canaan. Instead, they believed the Canaanites had accepted them and would respect the measures they had taken to protect their own interests. And so the environment for assimilation already existed. If an environment for assimilation already existed in Canaan, then the family of Yaakov could only develop into the nation of Israel in a land where they would not be permitted to assimilate. Egypt was such a land. The Egyptians would not accept the Bnei Israel, even Yosef, as equals, making the environment of Egypt impossible for assimilation. A close reading of both Vayishlach and Vayeki may reveal several clues regarding Yaakov's position. And we can now identify a probable reason for the inclusion of this narrative concerning Dina in the Torah. These events, far from being an aside or a detour, something to be skipped, are relevant to the unfolding of Hashem's plan for our people. The attitude of Yaakov's sons toward the people of Canaan is one of the factors that dictated the necessity of our exile in Egypt. Central to this theme is the telling of Dina's horrific ordeal and the subsequent destruction of the family of Shechem. Torah records Yaakov's unequivocal displeasure with the radical solution achieved by his sons. They argued that justice and family honor justified their actions. At first glance, it might appear that Yaakov's harsh judgment of their actions is rooted primarily in a sense of vulnerability and fear of isolation, purely pragmatic considerations. But Shimon and Levi's response suggests that they dismissed Yaakov's objections precisely on the grounds that a commitment to principle justified jeopardizing the security of their fledgling tribe. Yaakov's disappointment in his two sons, like that of any father, is reflected in the harsh words that he directs to them in his final communication, his parting prophecy in Parashat Vayikra, chapter 49. The tone and the timing of his final evaluation reflects a profound and idealistic rejection of their values, as Yaakov remembered years later the Shechem incident. It is inconceivable that Yaakov Avinu, the father of the nation of Israel, would compromise idealistic values for the sake of security. It was precisely because of Yaakov's own courage and integrity in confronting and overcoming various formidable obstacles in his own life that he earned the title Yisrael given to him by God. Yaakov condemned the conduct of his sons because it contravened the as yet unwritten mishpatim of Hashem. God's commands did not warrant the death penalty for Shechem. Yaakov's sons should have prosecuted Shechem for Dina's violation and her release, while Shechem and his friends violated Dina and compromised the dignity and honor of Yaakov's family. The brothers' response was not halakhically justified. According to this perspective, Yaakov's outrage stemmed from his dedication to God's principles, even in the face of personal humiliation. Were the men of the city who refused to take action against Shechem liable to the punishment of death, as Shimon and Levi insisted? Yaakov had previously proved himself fearless in pursuing his spiritual obligations, and so his condemnation of his son's initiative would be puzzling if this was compliant with the teachings of God. But he sees them as not compliant. the Torah contrasts the initial reactions of Yaakov and his sons. When Yaakov first confronts the highly disturbing evidence, we're told that he responded with silence, in which we can see his sense of outrage and personal violation. His suppression of any external expression of anger or emotion undoubtedly reflects the attribute of gevurah, power or strength. As a matter of principle, Yaakov considered the long-term implications of any action that might affect the destiny of his family. He also took the time to think about the potential consequences for the reputation of Beit Yisrael and the God of Yisrael. His sons, on the other hand, reacted immediately, instinctively, emotionally, and reflexively. We note that Yaakov relates initially to Dina, his daughter, as the personal victim of this crime, and yet is still able to put the long-range interests of his family ahead of personal or family considerations. His sons first perceived the matter in terms of its impact upon their sister, and yet seem unable to reflect upon the broader potential implications of their actions. Later, when they too shift their focus to the personal aspect of this violation, they seem oblivious to the broader issues. Yaakov's condemnation of them tells us that the security and reputation of Kol Yisrael are not merely pragmatic matters, but they constitute significant values and ideals. The brothers acted without deliberation, without consulting Yaakov, which of course they should have done. The implications of this breach of authority and hierarchy is disturbing, not only in the present but for the future. Torah emphasizes the use of mirma, duplicity, which is why Yaakov charges the brothers with sullying the family reputation. Yaakov's critique of his sons is motivated by God's perspective. Their act makes later treatment of their brother Yosef unsurprising. Brit Milah, the unique symbol of Kol Yisrael's special covenant relationship with Hashem, was used wrongfully in vengeance. Yaakov Avinu rejected his son's actions because he believed righteousness must be pursued through principled methods. That is, the end does not justify the means. Yaakov emphasizes rejection of immediate and violent solutions. His sons, failing to learn anything, went on to persecute Yosef. Yaakov's wisdom and balance is reflected in his ability to apply a principled approach even in dealing with the pagans around him. So why is this narrative included? So that we might learn wisdom at the feet of our Father Yisrael. This is not so much a matter of forgiveness as of ethical conduct, no matter what the situation or the people with whom we are dealing. May God bless you and give you a good Shabbat and a good week. Shabbat Shalom.